Well, welcome everybody. On behalf of the Univision Automotive team, it's a pleasure to be here today. I wanted to just kind of set things up for you, give you a sense of how vitally important this segment of the marketplace is. And as I was preparing my comments for today, it dawned on me that it was exactly 10 years ago this week that I made a presentation at the Motor City West Conference at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. Some of you were probably there, and you know who you are. And if you were there, you might recall that my subject matter that day was the coming out party of the next great automotive brand in America. And that brand at that time happened to be my employer, Hyundai. Well, needless to say, about half the room thought I was smoking the drapes when I made that comment. Because if you think about Hyundai 10 years ago, not Hyundai today. Well, fast forward 10 years, and what a difference a decade makes. Hyundai is clearly a great automotive brand here in this country, as is its sister brand, Kia. So what a difference a decade can make indeed. And if that was Hyundai's coming out party, then the 2010 census was definitely the coming out party for the Hispanic consumer here in America. 52 million Americans are of Hispanic heritage. That is 17% of the U.S. population. And what's really fascinating is if you peel back the onion a little farther and you see where that population growth has taken place, it's not where you would expect. It's in markets like in states like Missouri and Iowa and Nebraska and South Dakota, even Maine and New Hampshire, not the usual suspects of Florida, Texas, and California. And if we look out another decade to 2020, it's going to be up to 66 million Americans, up 28%, and that's nearly 20% of the U.S. population. That's nearly 1 in 5 adults in America of Hispanic heritage. In fact, today, right now, 1 in 4 children born in this country are of Hispanic heritage. It's fascinating. What's even more fascinating is 100% of that growth is going to take place in the 18 to 49 demo where most of you are spending your money. And you're thinking, how can that be possible? That can't be possible. Well, it's possible because every other segment of the marketplace is either flat or declining. Hispanics are growing like crazy, and it's going to continue. They are the largest, they are the youngest, and they are the fastest growing minority group here in America. And when I say youngest, I don't mean by a year or two. The average Hispanic in the United States is almost 11 years younger than the population at large. Now think about that as an automotive marketer. That's at least 1, possibly 2 purchase cycles younger than the rest of the population. That means when I'm up in that big showroom in the sky, Mr. Gonzalez is still walking into a showroom down here and buying your product. That's pretty amazing. And do they buy products? Yes, they do. Last year, 10% of all new vehicle sales were to Hispanics. But more important than that, of the overall vehicle sales growth last year, which was 13%, in the Hispanic marketplace, it was 25%. So they're coming back to market even quicker than the marketplace at large. And they spend on parity with the marketplace at large. The average Hispanic spent $27,000 on a new vehicle. The average new vehicle sold was $28,600. And it's not just in the mass market segments. If we look at the luxury segments, the same thing is true. $48,000 is the average, $47,000 is the average for the Hispanic consumer. And when it comes to leasing, they're also on par. 19% lease penetration versus 20% overall. So you see, this consumer not only is the largest, fastest growing, and youngest, but it has a lot in common with the automotive marketplace at large. But what is the one differentiating factor? What is the connective tissue that this segment of the marketplace has that is unique? That's language. Fully 85% of them speak Spanish. Almost 75% of them are fully bilingual. And you probably work with people who speak fluent English all day long, yet they may go home at night and speak fluent Spanish. And they may consume Spanish language media as well. And that's not likely to change over the next decade. If we look at the trend, as the population grows, the Spanish language usage continues. And as I said, that is not a necessity, that is a choice. That is the connective tissue that keeps this segment of the population together, and it's what makes communicating to them in Spanish language media so culturally relevant. So the good news is we have 4 experts up here today who have enjoyed great success marketing to Hispanics at a variety of different levels, whether it be at a national brand level, at a regional marketing level, in a regional market or an individual market, or at a dealer Tier 1 retail level or Tier 3 retail level. So let's meet them now. First of all, Mr. Tom Payton, who is the Assistant Vice President of Marketing and Advertising for American Honda. Tom is responsible for all marketing, all advertising, all media strategy, and creative development for both of those brands. Tom's been with Honda for a long time, and before that, Tom was with Chrysler for a long time. He had a very distinguished career there. And before that, he had the unique experience of working for American Motors. Catch up with Tom afterwards, and he'll tell you all about that. Second, we have Ms. Trina Barta. Trina is the Director of Media Operations for General Motors. Trina is responsible for, congratulations, Trina, you have fans in the house. She's responsible for media planning, buying, and research across the entire General Motors enterprise. And she has, previous to General Motors, she was at XM Satellite Radio as well as working on their OnStar operation and was in charge of the Hummer launch as their advertising manager. So welcome, Trina. We also have Mr. Sean Wolfington. Sean is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Wolfington Companies. He is an entrepreneur par excellence with businesses in automotive marketing, technology, and the film industry. He has built and sold 3 digital marketing companies and currently owns interest in a group of digital marketing and technology companies in the automotive and film production industry. So welcome, Sean. And finally, last but not least, we have Mr. Brian Benstock. Brian is the Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Paragon Auto Group, a very profitable and successful group of dealers in one of the largest markets in the country, New York. And these folks are going to share with us some of their insights as to how they've done such a great job with this consumer. So, with your permission, I will come sit down with you and ask Tom the first question. So, American Honda Motor Company spent many years there. They have had a great history of success with the Hispanic consumer, Tom. Are there any specifics that you can point to over the last 25 years that have contributed to that long-term success?
Well, the one word that comes to mind, and it's not the silver bullet I think a lot of people are looking for, but it's consistency. You know, we're very fortunate now that I think Civic is the #1 selling car to Hispanics in the U.S. and Accord's #3. And you know what? It's been like that for almost 20 years. And, you know, the company had the foresight about 25 years ago to get into Hispanic marketing. One of the early buyers of the World Cup, back when a lot of people really didn't have any idea what the World Cup was in the U.S. And, you know, every year we've kept a constant budget and try to grow it a little bit every year. And don't have on years and off years and just keep at it. I think it's paid great dividends for us.
Terrific. The same could also be said for Chevrolet, Trina. I mean, Chevy's had a great history with the Hispanic consumer. Anything specific or unique that you could point to that's been successful for you over the years?
You know, for Chevrolet, we try to really focus on, key areas within the country, working with our partners very collaboratively to build programs that work well for not only, the Chevy brand corporately, but also with the local communities. So we found some great success with starting with a conversation, right? So we think it's really important that we bring in our partners, we start to talk and build briefs on what we're trying to accomplish so that they can help give us really unique opportunities that very much directly relate to what the consumer is interested in and make that direct connection for Chevrolet. So, that's something that we've started a long time ago, we continue to do, and, on top of that, we also layer some, great national properties that, working with partners like Telemundo and Univision and the NAHP, where, we build programs at a national level that then can filter down into the local levels with our dealers and local marketing groups. So we try to take this, total approach on how do we connect with them at many different levels.
Great, thank you. Sean, a question for you. There's always a lot of discussion when it comes to advertising to Hispanics of, do we advertise in Spanish, do we advertise in English? As I mentioned, the vast majority of these consumers were born in this country, they didn't immigrate here, and they are fully bilingual. But there are nuances to that communication. Share a little bit of your experience as an advertising agency producing work in Spanish language for your clients, and what are some of the tricks of the trade, if you will, to make sure that it's as relevant a piece of communication as it can be?
Well, one of the common mistakes is that for those that are spending money, they will either just dub over their English language, and depending on the campaign and the message, it may or may not resonate. Or even worse than that is if they create their own creative, and the creative has a total disconnect with the Hispanic audience. The majority of the Hispanic audience in the United States is from Mexico. So things as important as accents that we may underestimate the importance of are critically important, because there's certain Spanish accents that are more neutral and attractive, just like there are here. And so also, just from a pure quantity and quality, there's a lot less people advertising to 52 million people nationally, but also in his market, there's 62% of his market are Hispanics. And it's a supply and demand. If we have less people trying to communicate literally in their language and directly, who are they going to do business with? Because if I lived in China and I could speak both languages, if I saw an ad in Chinese, it may reach me. But if I see an ad in English, am I going to feel more comfortable? And beyond that, what happens when I actually go to the website? Is it in my language? If it's English, it's comfortable. If I call that retailer, who's going to pick up the phone? And unfortunately, most of the people that pick up the phone don't speak their language. And so having the right people and process at the store is critical, not necessarily with automotive background, but with Hispanic background.
Right.
Because it's a relationship-oriented culture. And, my wife's from Spain, and I live in Miami, and everybody wants to talk about, hey, I've got a friend who can help you with that. And so the retailers that market and then are able to sell these customers, these customers will spend more, and they'll return more. And they also are more likely to refer their friends. So, I think now is the opportunity, because pretty soon the secret's going to get out, and it's going to be more competitive for that same audience.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing, to your point about, welcoming them, into your business, if you will. And this would be a good one for you, Brian. When a Spanish consumer shops, they shop a little differently than an English-speaking consumer. It's more of a family decision, more of a group decision. It's not necessarily as personal decision. So you need to be equipped at the dealership to be able to handle, how that customer's coming in and how that customer's going to be handled. And I know there's also, our research shows us that the F&I process very often is a little uncomfortable for a Spanish-speaking person. Even if they are fully bilingual, they tend to be more comfortable doing their math in Espanol.
No question about it.
So maybe just speak to that, because you've obviously been very successful with that in your store.
Well, I think one of you have to make a decision to be in it or not in it. And I think that's one of the concerns. A lot of people think that by talking to the Hispanic market through television or radio ads, that means that they're Latino advertisers. And again, when somebody picks up the phone and calls that dealership, are you prepared for it? Do you have somebody that's answering the phone in their native tongue? To Sean's point, do you have a website that is easily understood, that was created by somebody who understands the language and the culture, or was it, did you buy it off the shelf from somebody else? And, I think we would be able to see right through somebody that was trying to speak to us in our native tongue if they weren't doing it correctly. And I think the Hispanic market also can do the same exact thing. And to go back to the point of why do Hispanics like Hondas, I think we can't treat the Hispanic customer different than a regular customer. Hispanic customers like Hondas because they're good cars. And, so what was Honda's best thing that they did to market to Hispanics? They created a good car, a car that people wanted to buy. And Hispanics, like everybody else, will be driven to that first. The cars don't speak Spanish, the cars drive. And a great car appeals to the Hispanic customer.
Great answer. Shifting gears a little bit, our research that we do shows that Hispanic consumers are very often early adopters, which might surprise some folks, and they significantly over-index in mobile usage. And we've seen in some of the presentations earlier today that that's a very, very important platform as we move forward. Just throw it up to the group. What, maybe at an OEM level, Tom, what are you guys doing in that space working with your digital shop?
Well, we see the big opportunity in the Hispanic market is definitely in the Gen Y or millennials, or any of the 14 other names you call somebody that's 24 years old now. And why? Because unlike their parents, they're probably second or third generation in this country. And they speak English, but they have Hispanic heritage, but they use all these digital devices. And there's a real opportunity right now with that person to reach them, to further cement the value. You know, their parents love Hondas, but they're still trying to figure their way because they don't necessarily buy into everything their parents did. And so it's a huge opportunity right now to reach them in digital and mobile.
Well, and close to Brian's point of, it's a good car. There's a lot of good cars out there now.
Exactly.
And some new brands that build some pretty good cars.
The great thing is I've got this in my pocket. And, part of our marketing strategy with Tier 10, who is our advertising company, is really, we've all as consumers and marketers tried to get into the consumer's pocket for a long time. And the easiest way is to get on their phone. And when you get on their phone through a mobile app or through other means, you're in their pocket. You can communicate to them effectively and for what we call the F word, for free. If you have an application and you've signed them up, you can then communicate with them as long as they have the phone for really little or no cost. And I think that's going to be huge in the Hispanic space where a lot of people are not paying attention to it.
But you bring up a really interesting point, though, is so before you can get the customer to actually download your app, right? You got to be communicating with them, talking with them in the digital space. And I'll tell you, that's one of the challenges we see is that there isn't a lot of opportunities out there in the digital space that's directly focused at this community, especially the young Hispanic. Most of it is general market, right?
You don't want to tell everybody, because that's where we're going.
But it's true that there's not a lot of places to really engage online in a pure kind of community area. And that's one of the biggest challenges we see.
No, for sure. From a media standpoint, staying with you for a minute, Trina, I mean, we all know the conversations that take place with media companies when it comes to Hispanic media about, how do we measure it, and is it delivering in the same way? And now that Nielsen has changed the way they track it, what are some of the challenges you face there? And how could you advise those who have to face those challenges as they look at their, never large enough media budgets and be able to spread it across what is really, an entire multicultural nation now?
Yeah, focus is really important because you can't do everything, right? So you need to understand your brand really well. What are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And as I said earlier, work with your Hispanic partners, your Hispanic media partners, and come up with ideas that are going to directly connect with what you're trying to achieve. And don't try to do everything. Get focused. Build from there, do a few things. You're going to probably make some mistakes. I know we did. And just keep at it, though. So you win some, you lose some. The ones you win, just keep growing it, building it, continuing to refine it, and staying with those kind of properties and with that connectivity will pay off in the end.
Speaking to the consistency that you talked about, Tom.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, you forgot to put in the one point that every great plan starts with Univision, and then we build on top from there. So.
And I make the check out to Thomas J. You talked a little bit about the nuance of language in the spoken word, and this is a challenge I know we've all faced as we've tried to market to Hispanics who come up with effective plans. You've got the Southern California group that says we need to use this type of dialect, and the South Florida group that needs to use that type of dialect. And you talked about being more neutral a moment ago, Sean. But if you think about, if somebody had a suggestion that didn't make a lot of sense down in Mississippi, you might hear a phrase like, well, son, that dog just won't hunt. Well, that same person might say that same thing in Brooklyn, and somebody say, what are you, a moron? It means basically the same thing, but that's the nuance of the spoken word regionally. I mean, that, I think, is still a challenge, when you look at dealer groups or individual dealers, is it not?
Well, I think it is, but I think if you're sincere and you're not faking it, again, when the guy from Brooklyn is trying to talk like a guy from Louisiana, it's transparent, you see right through it, and vice versa. I think when we're communicating with this Hispanic market, I think our showroom should be a reflection of the community that we're going to serve. So if I'm in a dealership that's in LA and a large portion of that Hispanic population is Mexican, I need to make sure that I'm staffing my store appropriately for the market that I'm in. It is not one size fits all. And I think the individual dealer, that's, I guess, why we have three different levels here. We've got Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And Tier 3, which is the ground level that we're on, our floor must reflect the communities that we serve.
Right. For sure. What about from a more regional or a national level? I mean, is that an issue for how you guys approach it? I know, Tom, you have kind of a unique situation with the agencies you work with.
Well, we do, and obviously more and more it's been critical that our general market agency and our Hispanic agency, Orsi, continue to have similar messages, even though they're talking to different audiences. At the same time, though, we still need that a resonance for the Hispanic message to connect to that community. But, gone are the days, especially with the cost of media and the competition out there, where you can have 3 or 4 different agencies, all who have 3 or 4 different little campaigns talking about 3 or 4 different items. And that's beholden on us as marketers to really corral all the cats out there.
Yeah, I think somebody said, whether it was last night or this morning, we talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, regional, national, local. To the consumer, it's all Honda, it's all Chevy, it's all Ford. They don't differentiate. So it better be consistent and it better be strategically on point. I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Going after the Hispanic customer, it's, from an economic standpoint, it just makes sense. We've got an audience here, I don't know how many people are here, and if we're going to try and reach traditional clients, and we're going to try and guess what television station they watch for news, we'd probably have to pick 15 or 20 stations, and we still wouldn't cover everybody here in this room. But with the Hispanic customer in our market, there's really 2 places to go. You'd go to Univision, and you'd go to that other place. And if you went to Univision or that other place, you're going to get 90% of the Hispanic market. To your point, the Hispanic market's right now 20% of the country. The Hispanic market's growing quicker than anybody else. And with 2 simple buys, you can get 90% of that population. So it's just from a cost-effectiveness approach, it's a great strategy, whether or not you find that there are a lot of Hispanics in your market.
So I got to make out a check to you, too, now.
I think we make the check out to you guys.
Yes, that's fine. We accept that. A question for you, Trina. I mentioned earlier that if you look at expenditures on even luxury vehicles, Hispanic consumers spend virtually on par with the rest of the country. And we've seen at Univision, as I'm sure Telemundo and our competitors have seen, the luxury brands are starting to put their toe in the water here. We're doing some business with virtually all of them. Obviously, we'd love to do more. How do you see that for General Motors brands? Buick or Cadillac? Is that something that they're looking at or thinking about?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, Buick has been, both Buick and Cadillac have been in the space, but Buick has really been leading with some unique properties on actually Univision. Most notably Avaluna, where it's more of an integrated property. So, trying to bring the brand to a new audience in a very natural, integrated way. So doing things where it's, connecting through telenovelas, whether it's on TV or online, has worked really well for them. Additionally, one of the main platforms that Buick is communicating over the last couple of years is their Human Achievement Scholarship Program. And that program has been great for, multicultural students, especially Hispanics. And so that is an area that is a natural connection for Buick. And I think that's really the key here, especially with luxury customers. You've got to find what's the connection between your brand and what your audience, the Hispanic audience, is most interested in. And that's a place to start, especially if you're new into that space like Buick was.
Terrific, thanks. Now we've got some questions from the audience here. Let's start with this one, which is certainly relevant to what you were just talking about. And I'll throw this up to the group. Where do you reach, where's the best place to reach in-market Hispanic auto shoppers online? John, want to give it a shot?
Yeah, I think in that situation, the answer is the same as English language. Because reactively, obviously search engine marketing is one way because they're actively looking for a Honda. The problem is a lot of Tier 1, 2, and 3 don't have a Spanish language search engine marketing strategy, whether it be in organic search, which basically means it appears for free, or pay-per-click. So having a Spanish language strategy is critical there. Second, though, is leveraging technology to identify what I call the perfect prospect. And to me, really Hispanics are the perfect prospect because we know that when we acquire them, when they buy a car, they're more likely to spend more and return more and refer more, but The other part of the perfect prospect is that they're in market. And today you can use technology to identify customers that have not just indicate like a garage predictor, but they've looked at Kelly, Edmunds, and the manufacturer's website, and now you know that person's in the market based on that behavior, and you can deliver targeted display ads. But those display ads ideally will be in Spanish. And so that's a great way. The other is traditional mechanisms are more successful with some multicultural communities. So when it comes to Hispanic print, for example, where some cases print will suffer more. If there's a small circulation in a particular market, it works better maybe. And then also direct mail even is actually, if you have a list of people that are end of lease or they can get into a new GM or Honda vehicle for a lower payment. But when you send that email or that mail, is it in Spanish or is it in English? And so the strategy is the same. It's just that the language is different. And then to Brian's point, I mean, when we do campaigns, the reason why a lot of associations like Univision, I don't say this because you're involved, is because with one buy, you can reach 93% of the market through TV, radio, online, and events. And I would say events, although it's not in market, if you do it right and you have activation, that's a great opportunity to build a database, to enter people to win a car for free, or anything to get their data that tells us who they are, what they're driving, and what they want to drive, and when they're in market so that that targeted marketing can occur at a later date.
Right, great. Hey, speaking of databases, here's a question from the audience. What databases have you used to determine where to allocate media buys to reach this consumer?
I'm not sure that I understand the database, but certainly you've got the same information that you're going to use. We call it the perfect prospecting, your perfect market, which is going to be to identify the customers with the highest statistical probability of doing business with you now and in the future. And again, the best customer you can get is the one you already have. And you can start by identifying in your database customers with Hispanic surnames. And not necessarily bifurcating those customers, but certainly talking to them in their language with your communication back and forth. I think the Hispanic market, from a digital sense, is a new frontier because there aren't a lot of dealers concentrating in speaking in Spanish and putting the fishnets out there in SEO and SEM. And I think this is really, for the early adapter dealers, a great opportunity to play in a space that is not crowded right now. But it is crowded with customers.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, Cash for Clunkers came out. The government didn't have a communication strategy in Spanish. And that, my wife's Spanish, and I know there's an awful lot of hardworking Latinos that have a clunker and could benefit from that. And so, more than my neighbor who wanted to get $4,500 and frankly didn't need it. And so, there was an organization that created a complete Hispanic communication strategy with a website. 3 different Hispanic celebrities.
Explain the program.
And through Univision alone, that's why one of the things I saw the power of Univision, nearly 500,000.
Who's that woman? Who's that woman that you have?
On Helicon Valley.
Okay. Sean asked me to support this woman in Helicon Valley, who I'd never heard of before, during Cash for Clunkers. He said, it's going to be X amount of dollars, and she's going to talk about the program and mention the website on her station. And Sean usually comes up with these off-the-wall ideas, so I've got to pay how much for a mention? And he said, well, I said, okay, I'll he's been right before, I'll do it. Well, she mentioned this website that we had.
Multiple mentions.
Multiple mentions. And it blew up our server. We couldn't handle the amount of leads that came in. We actually ended up giving leads to some of our competitive dealers just to have the client served. And it showed us the incredible power of, she was like the Oprah Winfrey of this.
So she was Ugly Betty, and the Mexican Ugly Betty. But it's just an example of how an underserved community, when someone speaks to them about an opportunity in their language, the problem is we actually had to leverage the call center to handle lead activity. And that was not just advertising, that was publicity through Univision.
Definitely a best practice. Here's one. Can you target affluent Hispanics in a similar fashion to the way you might approach general market Hispanics? And this is at a general market brands, it says. So from a brand level, let's have either Tom or Trina tackle that one.
Yeah, let me add one item. Trina adds something else. The problem is databases and targeting are not what they used to be. The old days were easy. If they have a Spanish surname, Sanchez, and they live in this zip code in East Los Angeles, aha, I found that person. I got news for you, almost 30% of my sales in the LA area are Hispanics. And they aren't all living in the same zip code in East Los Angeles. So when I pulled the zip code run, it hits almost every zip code in the city. Yeah. What a surprise.
They're everywhere, or should I say more accurately?
Exactly.
We're everywhere, because my mother, who's out there some places, Puerto Rican descent, and we're everywhere. I find that there's still a crazy amount of misconception / maybe prejudice, and then speaking to marketing to affluent customers, we have an accurate association.
And then, frankly, some of our customers will have the audacity to get remarried or divorced. So then their name is like Sanchez Jones. And then I don't know if the database picks up Sanchez or Jones when they pull back that database.
Well, and layer on top of that the affluent customer, because they're really good at not, being anonymous, right? It's really difficult. That's why I think some of the other things that we've been talking about up here and how to make that connection at a local level with maybe through events, getting people to sign up through BRCs, that sort of thing is a really great way. Because otherwise, it's really hard.
And that's exactly right. We're starting to create our own databases. Like I said, event marketing is helpful at doing that. And then purchasing your own files and input from dealers. And really you start to put a very rich collected database together at that point.
Right. Yeah, and what's nice is if you do Hispanic marketing and they go to a Hispanic website,
right?
All that data you capture is clearly
right.
Hispanic. Not that they're not bilingual, but our household is a bilingual household. And one thing I've observed is sports and news in Spanish, and telenovelas, so actually entertainment. So, and those are the three big categories, at least, that I see the bilingual Latinos in Miami watching. And it's also seen from an advertising perspective. Telenovelas, sports, and news work great. And so, I think being there, it's fortunate in your situation, is really easier to do than data. Because Mrs. Sanchez, that maybe third generation doesn't speak Spanish, she's not going to be watching news in Spanish or sports or telenovela. Whereas Mrs. Sanchez, or Mrs. Jones, who got married to Mr. Jones, which is kind of my scenario, will be, and that wouldn't be detected by what you were talking about.
No, that's true. And I would recommend to all of you who might think about tuning into World Cup in 2014, do yourself a favor, watch it on Univision. You don't have to know what they're saying. It's so much more entertaining. It's unbelievable. Here's one that's interesting. We've heard a lot of talk lately about the more highly acculturated Hispanic. Not even sure what that means, but what have you found to be the most effective way in reaching the mid to higher acculturated audiences? Is it within English language, utilizing Hispanic audience data, or not? And I think somebody even talked about, I think John Butler from Cadillac talked about maybe doing a little bit of both. But how do you approach that from a media standpoint?
It sort of depends, right? So it depends on what's the programming, what's the message, what's the creative. And I think that there's ways to have it be in lots of different places and that you can have it work in both. It really just depends on what you're trying to achieve. Chevrolet has a commercial that's running right now in general market, but it's a Spanish family, a Hispanic family, and they're speaking Spanish in the commercial. You don't necessarily really notice it, even though it's running in general market. So it can work. It depends on what's the story that you're communicating, what's the creative, and where is it living, right? The media buy.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not quite sure how to respond to this, but we'll give it a whirl. What, if anything, could you do to the vehicle itself to make it more appealing to the Hispanic consumer? And maybe at a dealer.
I would say one thing. The new Accord, I have some friends who bought the new Accord.
We love plug.
And no, but this is just a fact. There's no question, as you said, Hispanics over-index are mobile. And when you get into a car, it automatically syncs. And you can listen to all your music, which a lot of people say that the quickest way to a man's heart is through his belly. And I have found, with my wife and her family and all our friends in Miami, the quickest way to a Hispanic's heart is through music. And so music is a part of the culture. And the fact that all the songs I have right here on my smartphone, which I believe is part of the reason why There's over-indexing. It can automatically be heard through my speakers, not to mention Pandora with millions of songs that I can access in Spanish, which Pandora allows, but other radio stations, there's less choice because Univision runs the show there. But I think when it comes to having a connected car, and we were joking that the Accord's like a cell phone on wheels because it has all these things, and they're a social community. So the ability to post on Facebook and Twitter hands-free while you're driving, that's an aha. And I heard that, and I actually was sitting there overhearing this conversation with friends of ours of how cool this was. So I think that all human beings are motivated by safety and power and performance, but those technology features seem to over-index, with Hispanics.
Yeah, and our research has proved that, and it is one of those, defying conventional wisdom facts that we constantly, turn over when we get to learning more and more about this consumer. If we could talk a little bit, Brian, you've had great success marketing to Hispanics at the dealership level. And I mentioned earlier that our research has shown that the F&I process is sometimes uncomfortable. Are there any best practices you could offer up to the group that you've used effectively that have helped mitigate that concern for the consumer?
I think the F&I process is uncomfortable for Caucasians and for Hispanics alike. And I think to Sean's point, if I was in a foreign country, I certainly want to negotiate the number portion of my transaction in Spanish. So, a best practice, of course, would be to have a bilingual F&I managers. You also have to have contracts that are in Spanish. It's surprising to me to see how many people ask a customer to sign a lease contract that's in English. When we've marketed on a Hispanic television, we've sold the car in Spanish, and then when they're signing the lease contract that they're responsible for, we're assuming that they know everything that's in that contract. So I think you have a responsibility to have, from the time they touch the dealership, which could be on the foot, phone, or the internet, to the time that they take delivery of the car, that you have that transaction seamlessly in Spanish.
Right.
And also, Hispanics are relationship-oriented as opposed to transaction-oriented. A lot of Americans come in and say, let's button this up. No need for small talk. You'll have a half-an-hour dialogue sometimes just to get things started. And I know in meetings at Univision, it's like, let's have lunch. We'll do it over dinner.
Lots of hugging and kissing.
So in since most vehicles are sold on a Saturday and a Sunday, when there's people waiting for a few hours, the Hispanic customers may not mind if there's a connection and time to spend, whereas other cultures would get annoyed. But if then they're rushed to sign something in a foreign language and brushed out without some level of connection on a personal level, there's clearly a disconnect. And sometimes that's only just 1 minute of rapport.
Just being sensitive to that cultural difference. Well, we're getting the red light up here, which means we're all done. Let's give a nice round of applause for that man.